The tension that had once felt so unbearable between them now seemed to shift into something warmer, softer. Maximilian's heart was still racing, but it no longer felt like fear. It felt like possibility. He could still feel the steady pressure of Christian's hand in his, grounding him in a way that he hadn't realized he needed. For so long he'd built up walls, keeping everyone out, hiding behind the title of heir and son of the judge. But now, with Christian so close, he couldn't deny the truth that was unfolding before him. Christian wasn't just the bodyguard his father had hired. He was something more, something unexpected. Maximilian didn't know how to articulate what he was feeling, didn't know the words for the confusion and the warmth that were swirling inside him. But Christian seemed to understand anyway. The quiet confidence in his touch, the gentle steadiness in his gaze, told Maximilian everything he needed to know. Christian was willing to wait. "I never thought I'd end up here," Maximilian whispered, his voice low. The admission surprised him, and he felt a little breathless as the words escaped. He'd never been so open, so vulnerable, with anyone, certainly not with someone like Christian. "Where is here?" Christian asked, his voice soft but tinged with curiosity. Maximilian looked up, meeting his eyes. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like he had to keep his guard up. "Here," he said slowly, "with you. With someone who sees me, not just the expectations that everyone else has for me." Christian's thumb continued to trace slow circles on his skin, a simple act that seemed to ground Maximilian further. "I've been seeing you from the start," Christian said, his voice steady and sincere. "Not just the air, you." Maximilian let out a slow breath, the knot in his chest loosening. His eyes fluttered shut for a moment, and he took in the quiet, letting it sink in. It felt almost too good to be true. "Do you want to talk about it?" Christian asked softly, his voice filled with patience, not pushing, but offering a space for Maximilian to open up if he was ready. Maximilian hesitated, his mind racing, before he finally nodded. The words were slow to come, but when they did, they spilled out in an unsteady rush. "I've spent my whole life trying to be perfect," Maximilian admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Trying to be everything my father wants me to be. Trying to be the heir, the perfect son, the one who never makes mistakes. But I'm so tired of it." His breath hitched as he continued. "I'm tired of being seen as the perfect thing people want me to be, instead of the person I actually am." Christian's grip tightened around his hand, not in a possessive way, but in a way that communicated understanding. "You don't have to be perfect, Maximilian. Not for anyone. Not for your father. Not for me. Not for anyone else. You just have to be you." Maximilian's throat constricted as the weight of Christian's words settled over him. He'd heard similar things before, but from Christian, they felt different. There was something real in his voice, something unwavering in the way he stood beside him. "I don't know how to be anything other than what I've been for so long," Maximilian whispered, feeling the vulnerability crawl under his skin. Christian's eyes softened, his hand lifting to gently cup Maximilian's face. "You'll learn, and I'll be here with you, every step of the way." Maximilian closed his eyes, leaning into the touch, the warmth of Christian's palm against his skin, offering more comfort than he'd ever expected. He didn't know where this would go. He didn't know what the future held. Maybe that was what freedom felt like. The sound of footsteps outside the room broke their quiet moment, and Maximilian sighed, the spell momentarily broken. But the connection between them remained. Christian's presence still lingered, and Maximilian felt something stir deep inside him, a feeling that he couldn't ignore. He turned to face Christian, his heart beating a little faster now. There was still so much they needed to navigate, so much left unsaid. "I don't want this to end," Maximilian admitted, his voice quiet but full of certainty. "I don't want to go back to the way things were. Christian gave him a small smile, his eyes shining with something warm and knowing. "It doesn't have to end," he said softly. "Not if you don't want it to." Maximilian felt a rush of emotions. There was fear, yes, but there was also hope. He didn't know what this was, what was growing between them, but he knew it was real. And for the first time in his life, he was willing to let himself experience it, to let himself feel. "Okay," he said, his voice steady. "Let's see where this goes. Together." The dim lighting of the living room cast long shadows across the polished floor, flickering in the glass of the untouched whiskey bottle on the table. The air between them had thickened, electric with something unspoken, something inevitable. Maximilian sat on the couch, his breath unsteady, heart pounding in his chest as Christian stood over him, eyes dark with something he couldn't quite name. The atmosphere was different tonight, charged, heavier than before. The weight of all their unsaid words hung between them, and yet, in this moment, words felt unnecessary. Christian leaned in, bracing a hand on the back of the couch, caging Maximilian in without touching him. The scent of leather and something distinctly him filled the space between them, and it sent a shiver down Maximilian's spine. "You're playing with fire," Christian murmured, his voice low, rough, dangerously close to Maximilian's ear. A smirk tugged at Maximilian's lips, despite the heat rising in his chest. "And you're acting like you don't want to get burned." Christian exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening, but he didn't pull away. If anything, he leaned in further, his breath ghosting over Maximilian's skin, close enough that the warmth of it sent sparks down his spine. Maximilian's fingers twitched against the couch, resisting the urge to close the distance between them. He had spent too long being untouchable, too long keeping everyone at arm's length. But Christian had cracked through his defenses in ways he never expected. With slow, deliberate movements, Maximilian reached up, his fingertips brushing over the crisp fabric of Christian's dress shirt. He felt the subtle shift of muscle beneath the material, the heat radiating from Christian's skin. Christian didn't move, didn't stop him. If anything, he let out a slow, measured breath, his eyes locked onto Maximilian's with an intensity that sent his pulse into a frenzied rhythm. "Tell me to stop," Christian said, his voice a husky whisper against Maximilian's lips, though he made no move to pull away. Maximilian swallowed hard, his body betraying him with the way he leaned up ever so slightly. His fingers curled into Christian's shirt, pulling him closer, daring him to close the final inch between them. "I don't want you to," Maximilian admitted, his voice barely audible but thick with meaning. That was all it took. Christian's lips crashed against his, claiming him with a hunger that sent fire coursing through Maximilian's veins. The kiss was raw, intense, nothing like the controlled, measured facade Christian usually wore. He could feel the restraint slipping, the careful control breaking apart with every second that passed. Maximilian gasped against Christian's lips as he felt himself being pushed back against the couch, the warmth of Christian's body pressing flush against his own. Strong hands gripped his waist, anchoring him in place as their kiss deepened, all tension melting into something heavier, something dangerous. A deep growl rumbled in Christian's chest, vibrating against Maximilian's skin, sending shivers through him. Fingers traced over his collarbone, down his sides, igniting a slow-burning fire that had been smoldering between them for far too long. Just as Maximilian lost himself in the heat of the moment, the sound of a throat clearing shattered the intensity like a crack of thunder. Alan stood in the doorway, arms crossed, a slow smirk spreading across his lips as he leaned against the doorframe. "Well, well," Alan drawled, his blue eyes glinting with mischief as he took in the scene before him. "And here, I thought I was just here for security detail. Turns out I've been missing all the fun." Maximilian's breath hitched, heat flooding his face, but Christian didn't move away. Instead, he turned his head slightly, shooting Alan an unreadable look. Alan chuckled, pushing off the doorframe as he walked further into the room. The sharp contrast between him and Christian had always been obvious. Where Christian was all cool intensity, Alan exuded a lazy confidence that made him just as dangerous in an entirely different way. His gaze flickered between the two of them, amusement playing at his lips as he tilted his head. "So, are you two going to pretend that didn't just happen? Or should I pull up a chair and enjoy the show?" Maximilian shot him a glare, his breathing still uneven. "You're enjoying this way too much." Alan grinned, unbothered. "What can I say? I love seeing Christian finally act on something instead of brooding in a corner." Christian exhaled through his nose, clearly unimpressed, but there was no real irritation in his expression. If anything, his grip on Maximilian's waist hadn't loosened in the slightest. Maximilian knew he should feel embarrassed, being caught in such an intimate moment, but strangely, he didn't. The heat of Christian's touch still lingered, the tension between them far from resolved.